Hey everybody, Mary Fran Bontempo here. And before we get started with this week's episode, did you know that Brilliantly Resilient can come directly to you? That's right, we have keynotes, programs, presentations, workshops, all available to companies, associations, conferences, and organizations, either virtually or live in person. So head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net at the speaking tab to find out more. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our weekly Brilliance Bit, which comes to you once a week directly to your inbox and has a bit of brilliance from this week's show and will keep you living in a brilliantly resilient mindset. Okay, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. I have here with me today a young woman who I am really interested in talking to. Julia DeNey is here. She founded an organization, a company called Sense-ational, which is adaptive apparel for neurodivergent children. Okay, anybody who's like my age and most of the general public has no idea what that means, but we're going to get into that. Julia ran and created a partnership volunteer program for a local autism preschool when she was in college, and then focused her fashion studies on the needs of autistic children. So, Julia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So all those words that I just said make probably zero sense to most people out there. I have an interest in this because I have a couple of grandkids who have sensory processing issues, which once again, no idea what that meant until this actually kind of hit me in the face. So what I want you to do is explain what some of these things are to the general public. And then, of course, we'll get into what you did, what your part of this was in making life easier for these kiddos.
Totally. Yeah. So I think the first term you said was adaptive clothing, which I don't think everyone knows what that is. So that is clothing that's specifically designed with different features for people with different disabilities and different needs so that clothing is more accessible for them. So that could be physical disabilities, easier for them to put on themselves. It could be sensory wise, it's more comfortable. So we'll get more into that. And then the next one I believe you said was neurodivergent, which I think is
Sounds
one.
like something out of one of those dystopian teen movies that's out, you know?
Yes, I
Yes.
think the first time you hear it, you have to really, what are you talking
What? What?
about? So that's really meaning that you pretty much take in the world and see the world differently, and your brain is just like wired differently. So that could be autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder. So kind of these ways where, there's it looks differently for everyone who has these things or experiences this, but the general term really groups everyone together because it shows that they as a community like all share in the experience of thinking differently and experiencing their world differently and their social interactions differently.
You know, it's really interesting. You and I were talking a little bit before we started to record, and I have a couple of grandkids, as I said, who have issues with sensory processing. And these kids look, for lack of better terms, and forgive me for not being politically correct if I'm not, but again, for lack of better terms, these kids look normal, air quotes here, whatever that means. But things like as simple as the wind or a stiff breeze or something like that can set them off. And I've seen it. And you're just like, what in the world? And you have no idea what could be wrong at that moment. So this whole idea of neurodivergent, and the thing you mentioned it, you said people group all of this together, which I can see is somewhat problematic in and of itself. However, if we can get the idea in our heads that not everybody's brain processes things the same way, that's a huge leap, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think some of those things are when people don't understand that people are experiencing things differently, those sensory needs are often categorized as them just being difficult or dramatic, or they just
Mhm.
need to get over it, or they're spoiled and you're catering to them too much. And I think that's where the education needs to come in, because it's not a little thing to them and it's very real. And I think even when you say like the wind or the tag on your shirt, I think a lot of times too, like the best analogy I've heard is, their cup of sensory input is full. And once it's full and then the wind blows in their ear, it's like it's just going to topple over and their bodies can't take in any more of that input or that disruption. And so it's not that just the wind was the problem, it's everything else that they're moving through their days and trying to deal with and being exposed to and dealing with. And then once their cup is full and the wind or the tag set them over, they can't handle it anymore. So I think there's that level of it too, where it's understanding that, oh, it's just wind, you just have to learn to deal with it, isn't helpful, because in a day where their cup was lower and they haven't had to deal with a lot of things and they're in sensory friendly clothes, the wind may not have bothered them because they have the space to be able to kind of handle how they experience the wind a little better.
I think that's a really, really great analogy because I think what's key here is, and this is my observation, so correct me if I'm wrong, these kids feel everything, like everything that most of us ignore or see as a
Yeah,
minor annoyance. These kids feel these things with such an intensity. And again, we're talking about one part of this here.
totally.
And I do want to get into a little bit of what you were talking about with kids with disabilities and making it easier for them to access clothing, because that's not something we think about either. But these children feel things with such intensity, things that most of us don't even think about,
Yeah,
that you are exactly right. When they lose it over something that to us seems ridiculous, it seems like they're being difficult or bratty or whatever,
right.
which is another label that they don't need because they're not doing this
Yeah.
intentionally.
No. No, yeah. And I think it's so important to recognize that everyone, even with sensory processing disorder, is going to experience these things differently. And, some people might not be that bothered by tags, but they're really bothered by the wind. Or some people might be bothered by the feeling of wet grass and don't want to walk on it. And some of them may like love water and be really sensory seeking, is what we call it in that way. So there's all these different degrees too. But yeah, as you said, like you might have a shirt where when I say no tag, you're thinking, oh yeah, sometimes the tag in my itchy, bulky sweater bothers me a little, but you can go about your day even if it's a little annoying. But for kids who have sensitivities to that, it's going to feel like the tag's like cutting into them. Like it is that level of pain. Like you're being cut into every time you move and the tag rubs. So it is a different degree, and you can't always compare what you're experiencing to what someone else is.
So it's a heightened awareness, I think, um, to sensory issues. But to your point, sometimes things will bother them one day and sometimes they won't, which makes it all the
Yeah,
more difficult for the parent or the teacher or anyone else who's trying to help these kids along in life, makes it all the more difficult for them to help that child because you don't always know what it's going to be. So it
right.
seems to me like a preemptive thing, like the clothing
Mhm.
or whatever, is one little step that you can say, all right, here's your toolbox for the day. We're going to give you this, and that'll take that out of the equation. So
Right.
did you start to see these things back when you were in college and you worked with these autistic kids? Is that where all of this started for you?
Yeah, at first it wasn't necessarily seeing it, though I definitely did later on when I went to work in special education. I saw it in almost all my students. When we were just volunteering, it really came from the parents and the educators bringing up the problem to me who were seeing it every day.
Mhm.
And it was something, like we just talked about, most people don't know about. When they brought it up to me, even someone who was studying fashion and volunteering with them, I would never have connected that clothing could be a problem for them. And it wasn't until they said it that it all made sense. And I really started looking into it and saw how like widespread of an issue it was, and no one really was addressing it. But yeah, I definitely saw it later on, but it really just came from parents and educators advocating for their students and children.
It's really interesting because in the world that we live in, I mean, think about the things that many of us, especially women, have put up with over the years. Stilettos, tight skirts, I mean, just all in
Oh
the
yeah,
name of looking good. And we do it willingly and we put up with the
right.
discomfort because it looks good. But first of all, that's stupid.
Yeah, yeah,
Why are we doing this to ourselves? But second of
right.
all, to these kids, to your earlier point, it's like a dagger. I mean, they literally
Yeah,
cannot function, which then shuts them down for everything else that they could be
right.
learning and could be bringing some peace and calm and all of that to their world because they just can't focus on anything else. So
Yeah.
the next question then becomes, where did this, you focused your fashion training on
Mhm.
this, that I'm assuming was in school, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I led an independent study on basically making adaptive apparel for autistic children from in partnership with this preschool.
And then after graduation, you started to work in the, like, what's the timeline here? You started to work with special
Yeah.
ed kids, and special needs kids, and then this started, where's the timeline?
Yeah, kind of in conjunction. So I graduated in 2020. So everything was very, very early COVID, very shut down. And so the fashion industry was one of those things that really shut down. So our professors basically were, there are not any jobs for you, but hopefully by December, you guys can start looking. And I realized that even then, I was like, there's no company I really feel passionate about going to work for. And I like my dream job because I really wanted to keep doing what I was doing, but no one else was creating these clothes. So I started kind of thinking about that. And I think COVID was kind of that final push where, well, I can't get a job at a different company anyway, designing. So I started down the path of discovering how I could turn this study into a brand and how I could develop that. And in the process, went and started working in special education to work hands on with the kids and have a job during COVID. All the schools really needed people, and I was happy to jump in there. But it really worked out really well because I got to work really hands on with therapists and educators who had been in the field for years and then work with these kids daily and really see what they struggle with in school and talk to the parents about what they struggle with at home and where clothing could come in and help, even if clothing wasn't specifically an issue for them. Say they weren't bothered by tags, it's still something that's super convenient and you have on you. And in what ways could we add other sensory tools into clothing to help them throughout their days? So that's really where that side of the business came from too, was really observing what would be helpful to kids in school.
There's so many things that you just said that just made me my neurons fire. When we talked about, I mean, when we started Brilliantly Resilient, it was exactly 1 week before the world shut down from COVID. 1 week before. That was
Yeah.
when we had our big opening program and everything else, and then the next week everything just died. But
Yep.
to your point, when we talk about resilience, that's number one. And number two, we talk about being brilliantly resilient, which is finding your passion, your strength within
Yeah.
those challenges. And sometimes
Totally.
that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes you literally being pushed up against a wall and pulling at those resources that you have and going back to those things, those values that are really, really important to you. And you did
Yeah.
exactly that. So, this is in part also a conversation for all the entrepreneurial types out
Oh
there
yeah.
who are looking to figure out how they can combine those things, those passions with
Mhm.
resilience and with, their own brilliance. So that's number one. Um, but I also, I can't even begin to imagine how much some of these parents and teachers and so on must have just looked at you with wonder when you said to them, what about their clothes? Like, can we do something that helps with their clothing? And I want to get into the specifics of that because I have bought my grandson's compression vests.
Oh yeah.
And when I saw that your clothing combined some of that, I thought
Mhm.
this is just genius because it doesn't make the kids look different. And
Right.
that is so important for them. They already have the diagnosis, the label, the whatever.
Mhm.
These kids need to feel that they're included in a community as well. So let's get into the clothing. Tell me about what it's
Totally.
about. And I want to talk about kids with additional disabilities, the clothing that you've designed for them.
Yeah, so our clothing is really designed. The first step, what we were really talking about early on, was to be sensory friendly. So there's no tags, all the seams are flat inside and out. So there's nothing inside of the clothing that will be rubbing against you as you move. And then, of course, made of soft knit material. And that was really the first baseline, what every design I wanted to have and to have available. And then from there, as you mentioned, the compression and there's some other features I'll go into. We added additional adaptive sensory tools into the clothing so that what they're wearing can become things that help them regulate, whether they're a sensory avoider and they hate that input, or they're a sensory seeker and really crave more of that touch, like the compression. And I think even beyond just looking like a normal shirt or a normal hoodie, I think what was also important about it being integrated into clothing that I saw in schools and hearing from parents was it's one less thing to remember to carry around. When
Oh,
you have a separate vest, you have to remember that every time you walk out the door. Or as an educator, we shared a compression weighted vest across like 3 classrooms. So you never even had it. You don't have enough hands to run around and find it. If you realize a kid needs it, and you're on the playground, you don't have the hands to go run and grab it. And parenting is very similar. You never have enough hands and you can never remember everything your child could possibly need for each adventure. Like it's just so hard as much as you try. So I really wanted the clothing to be able to be that for them where it's already something they're wearing. And to your point about the compression, for those that don't know, like a compression vest is very calming. So it's a lot like for those who sleep with a weighted blanket. It's kind of that same sensory input that helps like calm and center the body. So a compression vest would go on top of your clothes. And what's hard is that if a kid's already having a hard time and you almost realize not preemptively that they need it, even though that's always the goal, you're then trying to wrestle them into a vest kind of last minute when they're already having a pretty hard time, which is very challenging.
trying to put
So I
out the
wanted to,
blaze when the fire is out of control.
right,
Yes.
exactly. And so I think what's great about the t-shirt I designed is that you can have it set so it's not giving you compression. So it's fully adjustable on either side, just like a vest. But all you have to do is lift up the top layer and tighten the 2 sides, and then it'll give them the compression to whatever level their body desires and they prefer. And it's not a separate thing to remember. It's not a separate thing to wrestle them into. It's just a quick, like, lift up, tighten, and they're good to go. And I think that is really what I also wanted fashion to be used for is enhancing their lives and making things more convenient in general from these tools that are offered. So not just even making the tools more stylish, but making it overall just more convenient.
You know, I'm just sitting here so frankly relieved to hear you talk about this because every single thing that you just said are things that I have witnessed my daughter have to go through. Oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
forgot this, we forgot the shirt, we forgot the vest. Where's the vest? Where's your vest? And it's just again, when they get beyond the point of no return, it just takes
Mm-hmm.
so much longer to bring them down. And I
Totally.
just I really want to stress to people that this is not made up stuff. This
Oh
is
yeah.
we're so used to putting up, I think, with discomfort, again, as I mentioned earlier, in
Yeah.
fashion in general, that we don't see it as the issue that it really can be for people who have these sensory issues. And as you said, some of the kids are sensory avoidant. Some of them
Yep.
are sensory seeking, which means they need that touch. They need more of that. There's so much going on in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you made these things adjustable is just is fascinating and it's
Yeah.
brilliant. So first of all, thank you for that. And I am
Mm-hmm.
sure every parent who hears about this and can get their hands on your clothing will be so incredibly grateful because again, you just you need to simplify life with these kids because it is a
Yeah.
constant surveil process. You're constantly
Totally.
looking at them and trying to figure out where they are. And this is
Yep.
one less thing, and it's a big one.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it really applied across how we I thought about all our designs. So we have a hoodie that has some built-in sound reduction and an eye mask that can pull down. So going from the sensory seeker almost with the compression to the sensory avoider, as we talked about, like the wind blowing in their ear, I think it's so hard to always, again, remember all the tools like headphones or things like that. And also, I discovered a lot of our students wouldn't wear the headphones, even if they were really bothered by sound. They really didn't like the feel of them after a little bit, or at all. And so I really wanted to come up with a solution that worked for them, that helped block out some noise, but didn't have the same problems for them sensory wise that the headphones cause, which was challenging because what makes headphones so effective are what make them really uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
So the hoodie doesn't block as much sound as the headphones, but block more than not having anything or just trying to cover it with your ears, which was a whole process to discover, but is now our bestseller. And I think it is, again, for that convenience of they already need to wear a sweatshirt, give them one that has the built-in tools that will help them in any scenario really quickly. You just throw up the hood, they can pull down the eye mask if you're at the grocery store and they just can't handle the lights anymore and the chaos and you just need to get through your trip. Like they can sit there and have their own little sensory break right there just with what they're wearing. And it's not something where you need to leave or go home or it escalates, as we talked about.
The other thing that I love about this, and this will lead us into another part of our conversation, is that as the kids get used to this and they understand what this clothing can do, it allows them some control on their
Yes.
own over the environment, which is huge for them because
Yeah.
that is a big part of it. They feel like they are being buffeted by the world constantly. And when they get to a point where they go, okay, I can do this and that will help me,
Mm-hmm.
that is a huge independence builder for them, I would
Oh,
imagine.
yeah. Yeah, which is huge. And I think everyone, you can take a moment to realize even the anxiety that would cause if you have no control. And when you go outside, most of the time you get overstimulated or this thing sets you off, or it's just really hard for them to enter the world. And knowing you have no control over that, like you're being asked to leave the house, but you don't know what you're gonna walk into, is incredibly anxiety producing and really difficult. So yeah, I think allowing them to have that sense of control even to whatever degree, I think is super empowering and really comforting and eases a lot of that anxiety. Like they know, well, if I have this garment on, I know that I'll be able to control what I'm experiencing to a level, and that will help them feel calmer when entering an unknown scenario.
I think on another level, again, we're talking about as they age into different things, it can also give them the cognitive awareness to say, hey, I can solve a problem. What can I
Mm-hmm.
do to solve this problem? As long as we're
Right.
equipping them with the tools, that
Yeah.
also trains them that they are not just here to be, I don't want to say victimized, but at the mercy
Yeah.
of everything else, but there are ways
Right.
that they control it and it can probably switch their thought processes a little bit to what can I do to make this
Right.
better for me. And that's an important thing for these kids because all children are dependent upon the parents and
Yeah.
look to the parents and look to older people obviously for solutions, but the goal for any parent with any child is to help them figure out their own world. And
Yeah,
this can
totally.
start to give these kids the tools to know that that's possible. So, first of all, again, thank you so
Right.
much. But now this leads us into the part of the conversation where we're talking about kids with other disabilities, maybe physical
Mhm.
disabilities. And you offer some things for those kinds of kids too?
Yeah, so our main focus has definitely been on the sensory. But with that, kind of I looked at autism kind of holistically and other challenges they may have for my students. And one of the big ones was fine motor skills and kind of that ability to dress and undress yourself is a really hard physical task. So that really applies across different disabilities too for different reasons. And so one thing they did in all the hoodies, they're magnetic closures. So there's no zippers or buttons or snaps. And on the pants, they're like wide, soft, elastic waistbands. So that as we talked about with independence, there's that side of independence too, where you're able to dress and undress yourself in a way that's still comfortable, still stylish, still convenient. And it allows kids to kind of take that control and kind of gain that skill, even if they're still working on the fine motor skills required for some of these more, these very old fashioned closures. I actually love the nonprofit Runway of Dreams really works on adaptive fashion. And she talks all the time about how buttons and these kind of very challenging closures were invented so long ago, and we just have never updated them. And magnetic closures has really become one that now across all adaptive fashion, you see a lot more because it allows for that convenience and independence in dressing in a new modern way.
It's so funny you say that because my mind immediately went to my husband saying, can you button this little tiny itty bitty
Yes.
button on my
Oh my
collar of my
gosh.
dress shirt and you got to get to
Yes.
and we just accept that. But
Oh yeah.
as again, it's been for so long. Of course, those things are functional, they work, everything. But
Right.
this whole concept of ease with
Mm-hmm.
dressing, and again, we don't think about how much harder. So I mean, my husband's a grown man, he can't get his fingers to
Right.
work to fix his button.
Yeah.
Imagine a child who has fine motor skill issues or some other kind of disabilities, and just the frustration level that they
Mm-hmm.
experience in trying to do something that the rest of us take for granted, that we just do it. So I
Right.
mean, the idea of having things, it makes it better for everybody. It makes it better for the
Oh
kid.
yeah.
It makes it better for the parents. It makes it better for the teachers. And I'm thinking about one of my grandsons in particular, and I'm thinking I got to get that sweatshirt, because this is a kid who he'll go outside, or he'll even be in the kitchen or whatever, and he'll go, the lights are too bright. And I'm like,
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? But for him, it's a
Yeah.
very real thing. And once they get
Totally.
past that level of saturation, the lights being too bright soon devolves
Oh
into
yeah.
wailing and sobbing and all of that. And you're like, what the heck? But again, this is something that they can learn, that they have the tools to
Mhm.
preempt. And that is
Totally.
just huge. It's so
Yeah.
empowering for them, not to mention a huge sigh of relief for parents and teachers. So,
Totally. Yeah. I think that like empowering them to feel safe and heard is what I say a lot. Our goal is safe, heard, and included, because so often they also have a hard time or can't advocate for themselves or say, some kids can't say, okay, the lights are too bright, even. So you don't even really know. And they like just feel so defeated and frustrated that they can't even tell you what's wrong, and you don't necessarily know, or you're just trying to figure it out and you're trying to guess, or you've never heard of sensory issues and this is new to you. So that's also really hard. And I think by having clothing that's something a part of our daily life that has these tools, say like, oh, our hoodie has an eye mask in it, it takes a pause, and some people have been like, well, why?
why?
And then that's a chance to be an educational tool too. And so often I have autistic adults, and parents say, oh my gosh, I wish I had this as a kid. Like, no one understood how bothersome XYZ was for me. And the goal is that the next generation doesn't have to say that, right? Like, we have the tools and understanding to help them and help them feel heard in these issues, and know that we know they're real and they're not being dramatic.
That is so enormously huge, because I, again, have witnessed a lot of this firsthand and I don't even understand it. And
Yeah.
full disclosure, there have been times when I've lost my temper and thought, what is wrong with you? And that's not what you want to say to a kid
Yeah.
who is having sense. I said it in my head. Fortunately, I bit my tongue. I didn't
Right.
say it out loud, but you do think that. And here's the key: there is something, it's not wrong, but it's different. And we have
Yeah.
to open the ears of the rest of us who just plow through the day with minor annoyances and deal with it, to recognizing that these kids, their brains are, for lack of, again, a better term, and I'm saying that a lot today because most of us don't have an understanding of this, but their
Yeah.
brains are so hyper sensitive. They take in everything, where the rest of us have a filter. And maybe that's the way to describe it, that we are
Yeah.
equipped with different filters.
Totally. Yeah. And I think what's so important is that even if your child doesn't have it, or you don't know someone who has it, or you don't have sensory processing disorder, I think what's so important is just like normalizing it and educating it across everyone so that the next generation that grows up, just has this deeper understanding inherently from childhood and is more accepting of their peers. And what I love about adaptive fashion in general, and what I try to do with it, is make it universal. If we just have a sensory friendly hoodie that's made with magnetic closures, any child can love and wear that. Magnetic closures can just be fun and easy, and it's a quicker way to get your child out the door. And I think by normalizing a lot of this stuff, it makes it so much more widely accepted and then just understood, because your child may one day ask why it has magnetic closures, and you're able to explain that not everyone can do a zipper buttons, and it creates just this more universal acceptance, even with more adaptive designs. Like I don't have sensory processing disorder, but I love our sound reducing hoodie with the eye mask for plane travel, because I don't have to bring a different eye mask to nap on the plane. Or people message and ask if they could use it for migraines. And I'm like, of course. And I think what's great when you design for one group that's being excluded is it really does benefit everyone, not just everyone in that group or who's close to it, but it really just becomes, hey, this is for everyone. Anyone can buy it and benefit from it. And then that makes it so much more accessible and universally accepted.
I think you're so right there. And it makes us, it gives us a level of commonality, because even
Mhm.
though your issue may not be the same as my issue, hey, this feels good and it's helping me. At its most
Right.
basic, that's what it comes down to. I mean, frankly, with all the yelling going on in the world, I think most of us could use a compression vest and a hoodie with
Yeah.
with noise canceling, with noise canceling properties. But it gives us an opportunity to find commonality. We're not, and to just be aware once and for all that we don't
Yeah.
all experience the world the same way.
Yeah.
I do get very minor migraines, but I've seen people who get really horrible ones. And if you have anybody in your life who experiences things differently, think of it that way, but amplified and in areas that
Right.
you don't even understand. And it does come down to
Yeah.
this basic acceptance and awareness, and a knowledge that there are solutions out there that can empower these kids, especially to
Yeah.
navigate the
100%.
world better, because they're brilliant too. I mean, these
Oh,
kids are
yeah.
so stinking smart,
So
and
smart.
people don't see it.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I think that's such a good call out, is that oftentimes, like, if you're not meeting their sensory needs, like, nothing else can happen. So even though they can be crazy smart, like, they may not be able to get any work done in school if they're very overstimulated in that environment. And then, unless you've seen them in a regulated state and you've worked with them in a calmer environment, a lot of people don't even realize what's going on behind the sensory issues and like what they're really good at and where they're excelling and how smart they are. And I think that's such a huge important part of it.
I just had a flashback, and I'm obviously aging myself, but I'm likening this to people in my generation. I went to Catholic school and we had wool uniforms, and the nuns would not let us roll up our sleeves, and there were 75 kids in a classroom. So think about how you felt, folks, those days when you were sweating and couldn't think of another thing because you had your wool uniform on. That's how these kids feel all the time. So
That's a
so
good
and
analogy. Oh my gosh, yeah, I would not have
right? I
handled
mean,
that
does it
well.
makes you uncomfortable even thinking about it? You're like, oh my God,
Yeah,
how did they survive? But the fact is, we just survived. We didn't learn
right.
anything on those days.
Right. You didn't thrive in it. Yeah.
No, nothing got through. So we've all had those, the point being, all had those experiences where
Mhm.
our environment has impacted us to a point where we couldn't advance, learn, move forward, accept anything in it. These kids have this all the time, and you are
Yeah.
providing such a huge service. I'm so happy that you joined me today. This has been a wonderful
Yeah.
conversation. And
Yeah,
now
this
I
has been
want you to
so
tell
fun.
everybody where they can find out more about you and where they can get these items of clothing.
Yeah, so you can go to sensoryclothes.com to find us. The company is called Sense-ational You, and that's also our username on all social media platforms. And really my email is on there. And if you message on the website on the chat bubble, like it opens directly and I'll respond to you directly. So really it's super easy to get in touch with me directly too. And I'm always happy to help point to other resources and other brands of things we don't offer, help come up with solutions while we develop other products that I know are so needed. And yeah, but everything you can find on our website is at sensoryclothes.com, and you can learn more about our designs and what we have currently for sale.
Well, again, I am so delighted for so many reasons, not only personally, but the fact that you've made the rest of the world a little bit more aware of what is going on with a lot of these kids. So thank you so much, Julia DeNey, for being with us today. Sense-ational you. Everybody, please go out and learn more about these products and these kids and people who have these kinds of sensory processing issues. Let's have conversations about these things because they're important. They're there and they're important.
Definitely.
And if you need a little bit more brilliance in your day, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net. You can sign up for our Brilliance Bit, which will come to you. Julia will be a part of that. It will come to you weekly, and you'll learn to live a little bit more of a brilliantly resilient life. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Brilliantly Resilient Live. Thanks for tuning in to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Join our Facebook group and follow us on YouTube to be inspired with tools to reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance.